All right, y'all, we're going to go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to cover today. And I'm going to first turn it over to the lovely folks from Tilde who are here for our interpreting in Spanish to help folks make sure that they're in the right channel.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes. Yo soy Talis. Estoy aquí con mi cointérprete Alexia y venimos representando a Tilde, la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Talis. I'm here with my co-interpreter Alexia, and we are here representing Tilde Language Justice Co-op. We will be your Spanish-English interpreters today. Vamos a ser sus intérpretes del inglés al español y del español al inglés el día de hoy. Y para acceder a la interpretación, para todas las personas que no sean bilingües en inglés y en español o que simplemente prefieran escuchar y participar solamente en español, pueden entrar al canal de español. Si están aquí a través de una computadora, deben estar viendo un globito en la parte inferior en medio de su pantalla de Zoom que dice interpretación, como pueden ver en su pantalla. Pueden hacer clic ahí y ahí pueden seleccionar el canal de español. De nuevo, si sí son bilingües y quieren escuchar en ambos idiomas o participar en ambos idiomas, no necesitan hacer nada. Pero si prefieren solamente usar español, por favor, entren al canal de español ahora. Si están aquí a través de un teléfono inteligente o una tableta, hay 3 puntitos en la parte inferior derecha de su menú de Zoom que dicen más. Pueden hacer clic ahí, seleccionar interpretación de idiomas y de nuevo ahí pueden seleccionar el canal de español. So to access interpretation, and this is for everybody who is not fully bilingual in English and Spanish, if you are not quite comfortable in Spanish or don't speak Spanish at all, you're going to want to join the English channel so you don't miss anything that's said in Spanish during the call. And you can do so if you're here via a computer. There's a little globe at the bottom center of your Zoom screen that says interpretation. You can click that, and there you can select the English channel. Once again, if you are bilingual in English and Spanish, you don't need to do anything, but if you're not quite fluent in Spanish, please go ahead and select the English channel now. If you're here via a smartphone or a tablet, there are 3 little dots at the bottom right corner of your Zoom app that say More. You can click that, select Language Interpretation, and once again, you can select the English channel there. Un par de recordatorios para ayudarnos con la interpretación el día de hoy. Les recordamos mantener sus micrófonos apagados cuando no estén participando activamente para que podamos escuchar bien a la persona que está hablando. Y también un recordatorio de hablar a un ritmo moderado, incluso un poquito más lento, tomando pausas, respirando, ya que estamos interpretando todo lo que están diciendo en tiempo real simultáneamente. Entonces, por favor, hablar un poquito más lento para que no nos perdamos de nada y podamos interpretar su mensaje completo. A couple reminders to help us out with interpretation today. We ask you to keep your mics muted when you're not actively participating so that we can hear the person that is speaking a little better. And also just a reminder to speak at a moderate pace, even a little bit slower, especially when we read. We tend to read a lot faster than we talk. So just a reminder, we are interpreting everything you're saying in real time. And so if you can slow it down for us, take pauses, that way we can follow and interpret your full message. Por último, si hay algún problema con la interpretación, por favor díganos a través del chat y les ayudaremos en cuanto podamos. Lastly, if there are any issues with interpretation, please let us know through the chat and we will help you out as soon as we can. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much. Back to you, Mel.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you all so much for being here to help us interpret. We believe in language justice because it's important. We really believe it's important that all of information is accessible to everyone. So thank you for bearing with us while we do those initial announcements. So now if you are hearing me in English and that's what you want to hear, you're in the right place. If you need to hear this in Spanish, just make sure you choose the button at the bottom, the globe button, and choose Spanish so you get the right channel. All right, so hi y'all, I am Mel Umbarger. I am the communications manager with the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. And we are here today to talk to you a little bit about what you need to know about city, county, and state budgets. What does each one pay for? What are the divisions? how do the budgets relate to each other, and how can you use this information to make change? Um, just a reminder, this is a nonpartisan space, so please keep it nonpartisan in the chat as well. If you have questions, the audio is low. Let's see, is this better? I'll try to talk a little bit louder. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A button at the bottom. And now I'm going to introduce our facilitators who are going to be here to talk to you a little bit about this stuff. We have Tyler Day of Common Cause, North Carolina. We have with us Chris Nordstrom of the North Carolina Justice and Tax Center. I'm sorry, Justice Center. It's just it comes out of my mouth just automatically. And then we have our own Sally Hodges Koppel of the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. And so what I'm going to do now is oh, I didn't change it to this. Is I am going to tell you a little bit about the agenda, and then we'll get started. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about Budgets 101. Sally is going to take you through a little bit of some explanations and things. We're going to talk a little bit about the local, county, and state budgets and the differences and the connections. And then we're going to talk about how you can use this budget information to make changes. And we'll have a little bit of time for a Q&A at the end. And we will be sharing the slides, the webinar, any links or resources we talk about today in an email after the webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sally.
Thank you. Okay, so Budget 101. We can go ahead to the next slide. If you're with us today, I'm guessing you already have a personal reason why budgets matter to you or to your local community, but to ground us all in why budgets matter, budgets are a representation of our community values and priorities. They are how we make public investments that we all need to flourish. So in systems like K-12 education, higher education, our transportation and transit infrastructure, childcare, state parks. These are all things that we need. And through those investments, budgets directly impact our quality of life and well-being. So they show up throughout our lives. And it's helpful to just remind ourselves of that. On the next slide, you can kind of just look at some recent headlines from the last year to see why budgets matter. Especially when we don't adequately fund things like bus drivers, teacher pay, childcare programs, then the bus doesn't arrive on time or ever. We have issues with teacher retention and recruitment, school closures when staff are rightly protesting low pay, or we see a shortage of childcare slots because childcare programs can't make the business model work without public support. I wish I'd also included some positive headlines about how budgeting really is a force for good, but unfortunately, recently I've been seeing the other side of the ledger there. On the next slide, so if you are looking at a budget for yourself, either at the local or state level, a few places to start to kind of orient yourself. Usually we look at the general fund of a government's budget. This is the main operating fund for a local or state government, especially if you are comparing budgets over time or comparing different counties to one another. The general fund is a good tool for that comparison to do it in a consistent way. You also probably want to look for the revenue portion of your budget document, a breakdown in the different sources of money coming in from various taxes, in your county or city, for example. And then you'll want to look at the appropriations or the spending portion of the budget to see what your local or state government is spending on, where they're spending, who they're spending on, and how much. So we'll get a little deeper into this in the next couple of slides. On the next slide, we'll start with revenue. So this is our current state budget revenue sources. You'll see we get revenue from a variety of sources, predominantly the individual income tax, followed by sales tax and corporate income taxes. And two questions we kind of want to ask when we're looking at revenue is, firstly, is it adequate? And so if we think back to those headlines that we saw, we kind of have some lived experience to show us that we are not collecting adequate revenue at the state level in particular. And we can look at that in a more holistic way over time and see, we've looked into this at the Budget and Tax Center, and compared to the size of our total state economy, the revenue, the spending that we're doing is billions of dollars short of what we have typically spent at the 50-year average. We also want to think about if our revenue sources are equitable. So if you combine all the taxes that folks in North Carolina pay at both the state and local level, so the taxes you see here, along with property tax and local sales taxes, if you combine all of those, in North Carolina right now, folks with the lowest incomes are paying the highest percentage in state and local taxes as a share of their income. So we kind of have an upside down tax code at the moment. And that's because different taxes hit different income levels in different ways. So the individual income tax is one of our more progressive ways to raise revenue. Folks with higher incomes pay a higher percentage as a total share of their income, whereas sales and use tax are a regressive form of raising revenue. So it hits low and moderate income North Carolinians the hardest. So as we cut income taxes, both individual and corporate, it kind of puts more pressure on raising revenues from more regressive means. And then on the next slide, we can see a similar chart at the local level. This is Buncombe County, and you'll see there is a different mix of income sources, of revenue sources at this level, predominantly the property tax, but also intergovernmental revenues, so revenue from federal level, state level, or another local government, along with sales tax are some of the big ones. And you could ask similar questions here about adequacy and equity, and should note that, as the state pulls back from supporting certain areas of responsibility that have historically been theirs to support, it puts more pressure on local governments to make up the difference by, for instance, relying more heavily on property taxes, which again are a less progressive, more regressive way to raise revenue. On the next slide, I'll just go briefly through this, but on the spending side of the equation, the appropriations, this is a breakdown of our state general fund spending. So you'll see if you combine K-12 education with higher education, education spending makes up the majority of our state budget, followed by health and human services. And then I'll actually go ahead to the next slide so you can see at the local level, there are kind of overlapping areas of responsibility. So education is 28% of Buncombe County's general fund budget, and you'll see public safety on here as well. But different levels of government are kind of responsible for different pieces of the education equation or different pieces of public safety. And I think Chris is going to get into that more in our next section. And
before we move to the next section, before we move to the next section, we have a question in here from Peter. Is income from court fines and fees represented in other on the state revenue sources?
On state revenue? I am actually not sure off the top of my head. I don't think they're included in this chart. I think those get aggregated in a different place. But I can follow up on that after this call and send that out if that's all right.
Thanks. And from Russell, we have, besides the general fund, what other funds might we see?
Yeah, so at the local level, for instance, Buncombe County, as one example, they have, it's kind of just broadly called a special revenue fund, but it's really particular taxes that have to be allocated, have to be appropriated to a specific thing. So it doesn't come into the general pot and then get generally distributed. It comes into a special revenue fund and then gets really specifically assigned. But the general fund makes up the vast majority of a local or state total budget.
Okay, thank you. And we have and Chris says the state lottery would be an example at the state level.
Yeah.
Preston, I'm going to ask you to type your question into the chat if you don't mind. And we're going to keep going, but we'll have time for more of these questions at the end. Okay. I'm going to see the next section we have is we're going to talk a little bit about local, county, and state budgets, the differences and the connections. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
All right, thank you, Mel. So as Sally mentioned in her slides, the biggest area of the state budget is our public schools. That's what the state spends the majority of its revenue on. But it can get confusing because schools don't just rely on the state budget, they also rely on the federal budget and local budgets. So those three funding sources are brought together to fund and operate our public schools. And so I think when it comes to the interactions between budgets, it's important to understand what each of these revenue sources funds and what the various responsibilities are between these three bodies. Go to the next slide. So what you see here, these are the operating expenditures for our public schools in North Carolina from 1819, just because that is a typical year prior to the COVID pandemic, when since then the federal government has increased. But this is representative of what we have seen over the past 20 years or so, where the state funds about 2/3 of the operating funds for our public schools. The local governments fund about 1/4 of the operating funds for public schools. And the federal government, I think surprising a lot of folks, the federal government has a pretty minor role in the funding of our public schools, providing just about 10% of the operating funds. So each of these levels of government has different responsibilities, different things they fund, different policies they're responsible for. By far, the most important body when it comes to our public schools, especially in North Carolina, is the state government. So under our Constitution and the subsequent laws of the state government is fully responsible for the operating funds of our public schools. Local governments are allowed to supplement that funding, but at the end of the day, the state is, under our Constitution, supposed to provide sufficient funding for our public schools to operate and for every child in North Carolina to receive a decent education. There are some court cases about how they're not living up to that obligation, but that's a different topic for a different presentation. Some other things the state is responsible for, besides that big one of providing the operating funds, they set the learning standards, what each student is expected to sort of know and understand at each grade level in various different subjects. They importantly set the salaries, the minimum pay for teachers and principals and other educators. Again, often, local governments will supplement these minimum salaries, but the state is responsible for setting a pay scale, which is not every state does that. And of course, the state is also responsible for financial oversight, monitoring how districts are spending their money, providing those reports and other data related to education in North Carolina. At the local level, again, the local governments contribute about 25% of operating funds, but importantly, they're also responsible for the capital funding. So building schools, repairing schools, doing the operations of the school building itself. So that's most of what local education spending is on. It's generally capital and then salary supplements for teachers. It's a mix between how many districts actually are funding additional positions, most do to a limited extent, but the vast majority of local spending is on capital and the salary supplements themselves. Other important responsibilities for local governments when it comes to our public schools, they determine the distribution of funding across schools. So the state provides money to the school district level, and then the local school board determines how that money and how those resources are going to be distributed across the schools themselves. Importantly, school boards also determine school assignment plans, what school you're going to go to, or whether or not there is a local school choice system in place. Local governments select the curriculum, the specific books and lessons that students will be taught throughout the year. And again, I mentioned earlier the supplemental pay. The federal government, again, the federal government only provides about 10% of operating funds. It's really through 3 areas that they provide funding in our public schools. The first is child nutrition. They subsidize school lunches, particularly for students from families with low incomes. The federal government also provides a supplemental funding for students with special needs through the IDEA law. And finally, the federal government provides additional funding to schools with higher shares of students coming from families with low incomes through the Title I program.
Thank you, Chris. And now we're going to hear a little bit about this from for Elections of Democracy and its relationship to the budget from Tyler.
Thank you, Mel. First, I want to talk about the State Board of Elections and its responsibilities. So the State Board of Elections oversees and provides support to all 100 county boards. They have been chronically underfunded over the last few years, and that has meant that they have a smaller staff, which means that they can provide less support to these county boards. And all of their funds come from the state legislature. So this is showing you those responsibilities of the state boards. One of the big ones is issuing directives to the county boards. That often comes in the form of numbered memos that they send out to each of the counties that explains how election laws are supposed to be administered. It also involves managing the statewide elections management system, the SEAM system, as they call it. And it's my understanding that this system is pretty outdated. The state board has been asking for years for the funding to update this system. They also oversee the administration of election laws statewide. So when there are issues that come up at the county level or questions regarding the way that a county has done things, or if the county boards can't agree on certain things. We just saw the state board hearing non-unanimous early voting plans. That the state board will have that final decision overseeing those sorts of laws. Election protests as well. If there's an appeal, that goes to the State Board of Elections. They also train election officials statewide. I was able to attend a couple of the statewide conferences that they had, and there's a lot that goes into these trainings, talking about how you review. For one of the big things at the last training was on voter ID, which is new this year. So they train officials on how you're supposed to implement that. Also, a number of things, conduct at the polls for election workers, how that's supposed to work. And especially with all the new election law changes that we saw last year with Senate Bill 747, there certainly has been a lot to train officials on. So they train the election boards, election staff, and then the counties then will train their workers, their poll workers, and their staffs. And then they support the county boards. So you may be thinking, well, what does that mean? Well, one of the important roles that the state board has is having security and support technicians. And what these individuals do is they help support counties, especially counties that are smaller and may not have the staff. So in some situations, you may have, a county, and there are some counties where the election director is the only full-time staff person. This is especially true in some of the smaller, more rural counties. And so having, someone from the state who can come in and help, especially if, that director, gets sick or something, or, something happens, then it's really important to have those security and support technicians to be able to come in. They can also help when you have new directors or, maybe this is the first time that this director has implemented a presidential election. And that actually is the case for a lot of directors this year. And so having that support from the state board, because there's a lot that goes into implementing, administering elections, making sure that you're following all the rules properly. Having those technicians are really important. And I know the amount of technicians that they have has been reduced from what they had in 2020. So that's something that the state board is asking for additional funding to provide. And so at the county level, it is the county commissioners that are in charge of funding their county board of elections. Each county board of elections administers elections within their county, so they're in charge of that jurisdiction. And it is really all up to the counties to fund this. One of the big changes in Senate Bill 747 outlawed the use of private funds in elections. And, in 2020, many counties received private funding that came from outside organizations that helped them with staffing or with getting the supplies that they needed. And so, with that not, that money not being available, it's very important that the counties are able to fund their boards with all the equipment and the staff that they need. And it's also important to note that this is a year-round prospect. So, I've talked to directors, I've talked to county board of elections members, and they have told me that sometimes commissioners don't understand that. They think, well, you've got election day, there's the general election day, you've got primary election day, they're working those days. What else are they doing throughout the year? Well, they're doing a whole lot. Well, I'll talk about that on the next slide. So, as I said, is the role of each of the counties to administer elections in their county. And part of that involves, all of the early voting sites that you see, every single precinct polling place that has to be set up. They have to make those calls to the people that oversee those buildings. If it's a private space, then they can basically force a public building to be used, although they try to have a good relationship so they don't have to do that. But if they want to use a private space like a church or a privately owned building, then they can't force that person to require their use. So there's often a lot of negotiation and a lot of planning that is involved. And you can imagine in a county like Wake County or Mecklenburg County or Guilford County, where you've got hundreds of precincts, you've got to have all of those polling sites, and you got to make sure that they're all, also in correlation with the law, that that they meet all the standards required for a polling site. You've got to have the staff for all those sites. So again, training county staff, including early voting poll workers, election day precinct workers. These workers also have to be paid. But there's a lot of work that goes into training that staff based upon those directives from the state board. They determine early voting days, hours, polling, and locations. And that's something that actually was just finished up. If the county the county has to be unanimous on its early voting decision, or it goes to the state board. That process starts with the county boards. They determine how many sites you're going to get, where those sites are going to be. And so that's really important. And, the amount of money that they have, it could determine how many sites that you get. The directors will often budget for a certain amount of sites. Again, ordering supplies and materials for their county's elections. So that includes all the ballots, all the absentee, all the materials that go into that. So there are many envelopes if you're voting by mail that have to be sent to you. And there's a whole process with that. They have to order all those materials. They have to make sure that you've got all the ballot styles for your county. There are multiple ballot styles depending upon the precincts that you have and where the district lines fall. So you've got to make sure you have all the ballots that you need, and more than you need, really, because you don't know what the turnout's going to be, and you don't want to be in a situation where you've got voters coming in and you're out of ballots, and then you have you've got a backup essentially. But all the machines, voting machines, pins, all of those materials have to be supplied by the county boards.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you again, Chris. I'm going to pause us here for a second to answer some of the questions that have been coming up. And I can answer Jeanette right now. So what is your role in all of this, and what can we as individuals and organizations do? We're going to talk about that next. So we'll get to that. But first, Sally has gotten an answer to Peter's court fines and fees question. Now, Sally.
Yes, so Peter asked whether court fines and fees were included in that other slide in the pie chart of state revenues. And so that chart was actually just showing tax revenues. If you include non-tax revenues, then non-tax revenues are about 4% of general fund revenues, and then court fines and fees are about 15% of that 4%. So it's still a meaningful amount, and a good point that, like, as you reduce reliance on other forms of progressive taxation, it can put more pressure to raise revenue from things like fines and fees that disproportionately impact low-income North Carolinians. But thank you for that question.
Thanks, Sally. Jeanette asks, why did they change the law in Senate 747? That could be a very long answer, but Tyler, do you want to take a crack at a short explanation?
Sure. Well, I mean, what I would say is I would encourage you to contact your state representative, because they're the ones that made that decision. I think that there is a concern in regard to private money and the possibility that it could be used in a way that that improperly influences elections. But again, I don't, I was not involved or a part of the change that was made. I mean, there were a lot of other changes as well that were made, including changes to absentee voting. But I think that what those that voted for the bill would say is that this is about making elections more secure and making them run smoother. But again, I would encourage you to contact your legislator because and ask them if they voted for it, and if they did, then they should be able to explain why they made that change.
Tyler. Donna asks, where can I find taxpayers' role in funding public education? It was referenced during a local county commissioners meeting this week.
I think I'd need a little bit more clarification on that question. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, ultimately, all of the revenue comes from taxpayers for schools, comes from taxpayers one way or the other. At least the state and well, yeah, all of it does. So I'm not quite sure exactly what information you're looking for there, but my email is Chris, KRIS, @ncjustice.org, and I'm happy to follow up there.
Thank you. And Aletha asks, where does the funding for private schools come from?
That comes from, assume you're referring to the state vouchers, where the state subsidizes certain students to go to private school using state money. That is from the general fund. So it actually falls sort of confusingly under the UNC, the university's budget, the higher education budget, the UNC budget, because it is overseen by the same body that does a lot of our student loans and other scholarship programs, SEAA. They also run the voucher program. So that's where you'll find that money, is within the UNC budget. And then the virtual schools, those are 2 charter schools that are entirely online. I see another question coming up about charter schools. They are funded by a mix of state and local funding as well. So they essentially receive the same dollars per student as the district in which they are located in. And that includes both the state funding and the local funding.
Thanks, Chris. And then Preston, I'm gonna allow you to talk for a second here. So if you want to turn your mic on and ask your question. And you might need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
My question is, why are the poor paying the amount of taxes? And also, what services are they getting for the taxes?
So why are poor folks having to pay as much
That
money?
amount of taxes seems kind of high to me.
Yeah, those taxes, and then what are they getting for that?
Right.
Who would like to take a crack at that one?
I can take a pass at that. So yes, as we talked about, if you combine all the different types of taxes that folks pay, property tax, sales tax, income tax, it is true that the lowest income North Carolinians pay about almost 11% of their income in taxes, whereas the very richest North Carolinians pay about 6% of their income in taxes. So combined, our tax code is hitting low and moderate income families the hardest. And then you're right that the kind of other side of that equation is what do we spend our tax dollars on? And that's where we can look at those charts about here's the portion that's going to education and public safety. And you can kind of just drill down as deeply as you want to go. In education, for instance, there's, this big question of the private school vouchers, which are the funding that the gap of funding that's the program is unfunded for would directly benefit the wealthiest North Carolinians. So again, when we get into questions of equity about where spending is going, I think there are a lot of questions to ask our legislators about those decisions as well. I don't know if anyone else had anything to add, or if that didn't answer your question, I'm happy to follow up.
Thanks. And then there's a good point. Yes, Philip, all government money at the end of the day is taxpayer money. So yes. Okay, I am going to reshare my screen here, and we're gonna move on to the next section. Y'all, I don't know how to unpause it. I'll just stop sharing and share it again. Okay, so we're gonna move on now to how can you use budget information to make change? And I'm gonna start out here with a little bit from Chris.
Sorry, it took me a second to find my unmute button. I will say that, when it comes to following information, budget information on education, it is complicated. As I mentioned, there are schools receive those funding from those 3 different sources. That funding comes in different times of the year, or when those budgets are completed. So it is very complicated. I recommend that you follow some of the great resources we currently have in North Carolina. So that, of course, includes the Budget and Tax Center, the North Carolina Justice Center, where I work, Every Child NC, which is a coalition of education advocates working to provide every child access to the school funding that they're promised under our state constitution. Public Schools First also does a great job. They've got a great newsletter. EdNC is a very good news source. And then the Public School Forum is also a good resource for following what's going on with school funding in North Carolina. I'd also point you to a few different tools on the Every Child NC website. They have a tool that shows, it's like a drop-down menu where you can pull up your school district to see how much money your district is owed under the long-running Leandro court case. And then there's also there an advocacy toolkit. So if you are interested in becoming an advocate for your public schools, that's a good place to get a start, to get a lay of the land, and to understand the various issues facing our public schools right now and the various levels of responsibility for meeting our students' needs. There are also education funding primers if you want to get more into the weeds of how our schools are funded. There are links there for one from the Justice Center and one from the Public School Forum. And then also, if you're looking for data, I feel like our State Department of Public Instruction does a pretty good job of providing data, although it's sometimes hard to find on the website. But it's there if you look around. Where I would start is a publication called Highlights of the Public Schools Budget. And again, that's there in that link there. And I find that a very useful document that I refer to often when I'm looking for budget information about our public schools.
Thanks, Chris. And Tyler, you'd like to share a little bit?
Yes. So one of the things that I think is important to point out when it comes to the impact that you can have with advocating for funding for your county boards of elections is that we've seen that there is a correlation between voter turnout and election funding. And I'm going to show that to you in a minute on the next slide. But what we saw is that counties that spent more money on elections tended to have a higher voter turnout. It also means, if you have greater funding, you're going to have more staff in your county elections department. And that means they're going to be able to fulfill public records requests. They're going to be able to fulfill all the services that they need to. That includes things like implementing voter ID and getting people the IDs that they need, and reviewing those IDs. Getting voters registered, all those things. You have to have staff to do that. And so, a more robust staff means a better experience for the voters. And that leads to the next point there. I talked earlier about early voting and all the polling sites. If you don't have enough ballots at a site or enough materials, that can then cause problems. That can cause a delay and make it take longer. If you don't have enough poll workers at sites, then that can lead to longer lines. If you don't have enough sites, enough early voting sites, again, that leads to longer lines. So it all goes back to the amount that they are funded. And that also can even extend to the county websites and how accessible it is to get information, to review the early voting plan, or to even monitor if you want to see the Board of Elections meetings. Some counties uh, stream their meetings online, and other counties don't. And some counties have just not provided the funding to set that up. And I think it means a better experience, not just for voters, but researchers, journalists, and the public at large. I think that our State Board of Elections has a really great website, especially when it comes to data. So if you're interested in looking at voter turnout, voter turnout by county, and even going down into the precinct level, and looking at differences in turnout based upon the early voting sites, age and race and gender, all those things. It's all available, and they've even have some maps, some interactive maps that they've created. But all that stuff, making that available, you have to have people behind the scenes that make that information available. So it's really important that they have the personnel to do that. And I know that they have fewer people on working as a part of their data staff than they had in previous years. So it all again goes back to funding. So this is showing you, this is what I was talking about before, that correlation between election funding and turnout. And so if you look just along the x-axis, you can see that voter turnout percentage. And then along the y-axis, it's showing the amount that the county spent per voter. And you can see there's a line running through, basically a trend line. So as you go, you look from left to right here, you can see there's a general trend of going up, which would indicate that there is a correlation here between the amount that counties are funding. And I should point out, all of these dots you see, those are individual counties. It's showing the percentage of voter turnout and the amount that they funded per voter, per registered voter. So you can see how that is going up as you go across. And I'll point out that the dot that you see at the very bottom, in the left corner, the one at the very bottom, is Onslow County. And I believe on the next slide, we have some information about this. So I wanted to show you this as a case study, because Onslow, and that data, I should say, as well, that came from 2022 that you saw on the last slide, the 2022 general election. Onslow had the lowest turnout in that election. They also spent the least amount per voter in that year, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. So I looked into it, and I know that our partners at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and we have some resources that we're going to share with you. They have an excellent report that includes some information about Onslow and some other counties that have been chronically underfunded for years, where the county Board of Elections has requested a certain amount, and the commissioners have consistently given them less than what they had requested. And in Onslow County's case, it's been significantly less than what they had requested. I believe in 2020 they had requested, and I should point out, Onslow is a pretty fast-growing county. I believe they are ranked 13th in population. I'm not exactly sure on that, but they are, they've got it's a decent sized county. It's not a small county by any means. But they had asked for I believe it was just over $1 million for their elections budget, and they ended up receiving about 650,000 in 2020. So that's a huge difference. And in 2022, they ended up getting is about 632,000 or so. So we did some advocacy there. I spoke to the elections board and provided them with some data, and we worked with advocates, local advocates in the community that went to the commissioner's public hearing that they had on the budget and said, you guys have not been funding Onslow County's elections department, with what they need. And ultimately, they were able to get about $100,000 more for the 23-24 budget than they had in the 22-23 budget. So that's a big win. And I can also report, after talking with the director, actually just last week, that this year they have gotten pretty close to what they had requested back in 2020 in terms of the amount. So well, last year they ended up getting, it was 730 some thousand, I believe. This year they are getting just over $1 million, which is it was only about 25,000 less than what they had requested. So ultimately, that I say all that to point out that your advocacy does make a difference, and it really has an impact. Haven't been able to talk with the director in terms of all of the different components of the budget and what that's going to mean. But I know they had been asking for salary increases for workers. I know that there's a lot of work that they want to be able to do, and now hopefully they'll have the funds to do it. So yes, your advocacy can make a difference, and a lot of the time these budget public hearings, I don't think that there are a lot of people that go to these things. So if you're there and they're hearing from you, I think that it will really make an impression on your county commissioners.
I just want to hop in and just say that it looks like we're going to run maybe 5 or 10 minutes late. So we will continue recording this. If you need to hop off right at 1, we will be sending out the recordings so you can catch the end of the show. You're on mute, Tyler.
Sorry. So yes, counties are in the process of finalizing their budgets now. Many counties, there's an opportunity to advocate for proper funding for this upcoming fiscal year. And I do want to stress that the funding that the counties get for the 24-25 fiscal year will be what they have for this general election. I think we all are expecting, an election with most likely high voter turnout, a lot of voter interest. And so it's really important that that all of our county boards and the state board has the funding that it needs to implement a secure and an election that is as accessible to voters as possible.
And on the tax front, one thing that everyone can do is to sign the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center's petition to keep the corporate income tax. So legislative leaders in the General Assembly have passed a law that will eliminate the state corporate income tax beginning in 2030. So after that point, huge corporations with millions of dollars in profits will pay no state income tax in North Carolina. This will cost our state at least $2 billion in public money each year once corporations no longer pay this tax. So we have a petition going. The link link is there, and I'm sure we'll send follow-up materials as well. But if you're a North Carolina resident, you can sign, and then you can ask all your friends and family who are North Carolina residents to also sign, and help preserve this really important source of revenue for our state. And again, help us keep building momentum towards a more equitable tax code that really funds the things that we need in our communities.
Thank you, all three of you, for helping us understand what can be a very complex subject. Looks like Peter's asking, we have so we're gonna take a couple questions real quick. Peter's asking, do you have comparative reporting showing expenditures per person by county in North Carolina and by state in the nation? And are you talking about elections, I'm thinking? Oh, broader than elections. So in general, do we know how much they spend per person by county in North Carolina and by state in the nation?
I can start on public schools. There are various reports that you can look to. When it comes to state comparisons, I would look to two sources. NEA provides annual data ranking state spending, but I think the better place to look is the Education Law Center out of New Jersey, and I'll add these links in a second here. Provide rankings that are adjusted for cost factors, so it's a little smarter way to do it, and they look at other important aspects of school funding. So I will link to their rankings of states. But for the school district level, again, the Department of Public Instruction provides that information. They have on their website what's called the statistical profile, and you can see the district rankings there.
Thanks, Chris. And Peter, we'll take a look at your question, and if we can find that information, we'll share that in our follow-up email. And how about for the court system? I think we can probably find the answer to that. And yeah. And then we have a question over here. Is there any estimate about how much sales tax a household pays in a year? And Sally linked to in the chat a document, a report that we did on who pays taxes in North Carolina. So you may want to look at that. Sally, do you have any other?
I don't know the dollar amount off the top of my head. We have it in percentage terms. So the bottom 20% of families in terms of income pays 6.6% in sales tax as a share of their income. But I don't know if we have the dollar amount.
Thank you. Okay. We are running over, so I am gonna do some next steps now, and we'll include contact information for folks here so that if you have any other questions that come up, you can contact us and we can do our best to help you. So next steps, today, hopefully this afternoon or tomorrow morning, we're going to be sending you an email with the video recording of this webinar and links to all of the resources, to the slide deck, to everything we've talked about today. Folks have given you a few great next steps. Tyler's talked about how counties are currently developing their budget, and you can advocate for what your community needs now. And Sally's included the petition we have going for the corporate income tax rate, because I cannot believe that corporations are not going to be paying taxes at all in North Carolina after 2030. I will share copies of the chat as well, Jeanette. And we've heard from Chris some great ways to get involved with education funding as well. One thing that we will also be including in the email today or tomorrow and is a invitation to join us on Friday with an action hour with Reverend Lisa Garcia Sampson. We'll include how to do that, and we'll be there and have some concrete actions that you can take. It'll be 11 a.m. on Friday, and like I said, we'll include all the invite information in our email. And then coming up in August, our next Making Connections webinar, we'll be talking about some free and cheap tools that community leaders and activists and anyone can use to do this work. So we'll have a little bit more information later on that. And then last announcement, we're hiring. We have 3 job openings. You can check out our website, ncbudget.org, and see the jobs that we're hiring for. But we would love for you to take a look at them and share it with your networks with folks that you think might be a perfect fit for us. So and here's my fun action hour slide. And yeah, and you can contact us at any time at info@ncbudget.org and we'll get you to the right person. And if it's not us, we'll get you to one of our partners who can help you out. So thank you all. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all of you who joined us and who continue to work with us in this fight. And I hope everybody has a good rest of your day.